This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. With President Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement still showing signs of life in Congress, a former Clinton administration trade official says an agreement will let the United States, not China, set labor and environmental regulations. Anthropologist Richard Perry denounces the pseudoscience of biological determinism, the idea that genes determine the outcomes of your life. And Bill Press talks with fellow radio host and humorist Stephanie Miller. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Ira Shapiro was a trade official in the Clinton administration, and he says the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a good deal for America and that failure would be great for China. And we say hello to Ira Shapiro, head of a consulting firm specializing in international trade, U.S.-Japan relations, and American politics. He brings to the firm 40 years of experience in senior staff positions in the U.S. Senate, the Clinton administration, and private law practice. He is also the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Last Great Senate, Courage and Statesmanship in Times of Crisis. Ira Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's good to be with you.
And we appreciate your time with us. You are a former chief trade negotiator for Japan and Canada, so you have a great deal of interest in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Why is it needed? And perhaps more importantly, what chances does President Obama have of getting it past Congress?
I think it's needed because the Asia-Pacific region is the most dynamic economic region in the world. In the next 20 years, several 100 million consumers in that region will join the middle class. These are the markets of the future, and we need to remember that our country is only 5% of the world's population. We prosper by engaging and selling to our manufactured goods, our services, our agricultural goods to the other 95%. President Obama ran as a trade skeptic for president. And after the economic emergency was done, he looked at the situation and realized that the Asia-Pacific region was economically integrating, and it was doing so without us. We were on the outside. We would be disadvantaged. He concluded that it was important for us to be part of the Asia-Pacific and indeed to take the lead in an important negotiation. I think he was right about that. I think he reached the conclusion that any president, Democratic or Republican, would reach. As to whether he will get the negotiating authority that allows for the completion of the TPP and whether TPP will be approved, I fervently hope so. The Senate gave him that authority, 61 to 38, and I think that the House vote appears that it will be sometime this month, and it will be very close. But I think that many members know that despite the political pressure they feel from opponents, that the right thing for our country is to move ahead and give him the authority and complete this negotiation. And so I believe it will prevail by a narrow margin.
Is the agreement really all about isolating or perhaps weakening China in the Pacific region?
I think of it as more competing with China in the Pacific region, offering our vision for what the rules of the global economy and what the rules of the economy for that region would be. Rules-based, high-standard trade agreement. I think it's really important that we are working with Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, and 7 other countries. China, at some point, I hope, would join the Trans-Pacific Partnership some point in the future. They're not ready to do it now. But if we defeat this agreement, China's the only winner. China proceeds with its state capitalism and standards that don't come up to ours in terms of things like labor, the environment, intellectual property, the digital economy, an open internet. This is a very important situation, and I think it's vital that we have our competitive vision and model out there in the Asia Pacific.
Now, of course, there are plenty of critics, and they say that trade deals like this inevitably result in job losses. Is this just another NAFTA?
Well, I mean, full disclosure, you're talking to a NAFTA negotiator, so I might not share the view of NAFTA that some others do. Mm-hmm. Look, how many jobs are lost because of trade agreements is one of the most complex and hotly debated issues that there is. Many jobs have disappeared over the years, particularly over the last 20 years, because of technology. It takes fewer workers to produce steel or autos than it used to. We don't have as many gas station attendants or bank tellers or travel agents as we used to. These are all technological changes. Certainly, many jobs have been lost to international competition. But even those are not the fault always of trade agreements. We're actually doing better in terms of trade with countries where we have agreements than where we don't. So I realize that NAFTA has many detractors, but it represents a moment when the trade debate in the United States changed. But the truth is, we prospered throughout the 1990s after NAFTA was agreed with. And we increased trade with both Canada and Mexico since NAFTA. North American manufacturing and competitiveness is an important part of our challenge in responding to China. And frankly, I'd hate to think of where we'd be in terms of our relationship with Mexico had the NAFTA opponents won.
We're speaking with Ira Shapiro, heads up a consulting firm that specializes in international trade, U.S.-Japan relations, and American politics. He's also the author of the book, The Last Great Senate, Courage and Statesmanship in Times of Crisis. Overall, how would the TPP benefit the average middle-class American, and how do we protect those whose jobs disappear?
Well, I think, first of all, we are obligated to protect those whose jobs disappear, and I wouldn't limit it to just jobs that disappear because of trade agreements. I would extend it to changes in employment due to technology changes or other job losses. We've had trade adjustment assistance in the past. We're going to have it again. And I think it should be strengthened and expanded with some form of wage insurance to make up for a difference in income that people might encounter. But beyond that, TPP benefits Americans because it contributes overall to a stronger economy. We will be a stronger economy if the Asian economies are subscribing to our labor standards, higher environmental protection, greater intellectual property, and bringing down tariffs that are still extraordinarily high in many of these countries. Some of them, Japan, for instance, has very low tariffs. But these other countries, the developing countries, still have very high tariffs that are harming our agricultural goods, our processed foods, all kinds of things. So there are a lot of ways it benefits us.
Now, it's also been said that Hollywood has a stake in passage of TPP. How so?
Well, Hollywood, our movies are very much in demand around the world. And as markets expand and trade barriers come down around the world and intellectual property standards rise, our motion pictures get more access to these markets. I looked at some statistics recently and noticed that I think U.S. and Canada motion pictures revenue was like $11 billion in 2013. Worldwide, it's more than 3 times that. And China, for instance, is the most rapidly expanding motion picture market for U.S. motion pictures. And if you look at it, the 2 things that expanded the market in China, 1, China's acceptance of the terms of the WTO, and 2, the fact that we won a couple of important WTO cases against China, which enormously benefited the motion picture industry. So the motion picture industry has been a big supporter of expanded global trade and stronger rules, and they'll benefit from it.
What about health and pharmaceutical industry?
Perhaps the most complicated and indeed one of the last issues that will be resolved in this negotiation. And it's complicated for a lot of reasons. If you look at our debate in the United States only, we have a tremendous ongoing discussion between the research-based pharmaceutical companies who have breakthroughs that are important in terms of life-saving and health-saving drugs, but we also have a vigorous generic industry in order to bring drugs to people at lower costs. And we've had trouble balancing that. Each country that we're negotiating with is trying to work out the same balance, and then the negotiators are trying to come up with rules that cover all of them. So it's a really tough issue, but it's an issue where international trade negotiations have proven effective in expanding intellectual property, but also increasingly ensuring access to life-giving medicines.
Now, progressive opponents say that a new international arbitration board would violate U.S. sovereignty, but don't progressives generally support international organizations like the World Court, the UN? I mean, is this hypocritical?
I think this again is one of the issues that's been extremely complicated, and there's been a lot of rhetoric about it. The fact is that trade agreements for quite a while have included some kind of investor-state dispute settlement system, so that if investors felt that they were not being treated fairly by a trading partner, they could bring it to some kind of a tribunal. The critics and the opponents of the TPP have invoked the specter of all kinds of threats to our health and environmental laws. Foreign countries could challenge them. There have been cases, a small number, where such challenges have been brought. They have never been won. I think the last time I looked, we had won 17 out of 17 of those cases. But the truth is, I'm not going to get into whether it's hypocrisy or not. I don't know that it's hypocritical is the right word. I think that the fears that have been expressed have been exaggerated. When people say somehow that the trade agreement is a threat to our sovereignty and our health and our environment, think about what we really know about our own domestic debate. We've got a very vigorous debate over the environment. It's between people who believe in climate change as a problem and people believe that it isn't. People who believe EPA is overreaching. It has nothing to do with trade agreements. And that's the same thing in the health space. So this is, I think, an issue that's been quite exaggerated.
Okay. Ira Shapiro, head of the consulting firm specializing in international trade, U.S.-Japan relations, American politics, and, of course, author of the book, The Last Great Senate, Courage and Statesmanship in Times of Crisis. Ira, thank you again for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
No, it's always my pleasure. Thanks so much.
We appreciate your time. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Richard Perry is an anthropologist who takes on conservatives who still believe that biology, not one's environment, determines human behavior. We'll hear from him in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
How exciting! Chris Christie has become number 14 on the Republican presidential dance card. The big man from New Jersey entered the race with all the chutzpah and hullabaloo that marked his 5.5 years as governor of the Garden State. In his carefully staged announcement speech, he said he'd be a truth-telling president. "There is one thing you will know for sure," he roared. "I say what I mean, and I mean what I say." Swell, Chris, but when your campaign slogan is "telling it like it is," it would help if you were not infamous in your home state as an audacious, inveterate liar. Even the editor of Jersey's largest newspaper felt a journalistic duty to warn America about Christie. "Don't believe a word the man says," the editor wrote, pointing not to a few fibs and fabrications, but a lengthy catalog of, quote, over-the-top, hair-raising type of lies, including these gems. Having assured public employees that their pensions were sacred to him, Christie then made cutting their pensions the centerpiece of his first term in office. This June, he bragged on national TV that a court had approved those pension cuts, but the court actually ruled them unconstitutional. At a recent South Carolina gun rights meeting, Christie crowed that no new gun laws have been made since I've been governor, when in fact he has enacted 3 gun control measures. After he and his family racked up a $30,000 hotel bill during a luxurious weekend getaway at a Jordanian resort paid for by the King of Jordan, Christie claimed the junket was not a violation of the state gift ban, for he and the king were personal friends. But he had only met the king once in a brief encounter at a political dinner. This is Jim Hightower saying, if a politician has to tell you that he or she is a truth teller, they're probably not. So beware of Chris Christie, the compulsive liar. As the newspaper editor put it, he's a creep.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Anthropologist Richard Perry looks at the political motives of those who think that genes and race determine how humans behave. If you think people can't change, he says, it's a good argument for opposing change. And we say hello to Richard Perry, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at St. Lawrence University. He is the author of a new book called Killer Apes, Naked Apes, and Just Plain Nasty People. Professor Richard Perry, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, it's a pleasure to do so.
And we appreciate your time with us today. Can you briefly explain what biological determinism means and why it is not considered reputable science?
Well, biological determinism, as most people use it, probably should be expressed as biological determinativism, but who wants to deal with a term like that? The thing is that obviously we're not biological robots whose every move is determined only by biological signals. I don't think anyone's ever claimed that. But lots of writers have argued that our biology, our genes, strongly influence, guide, impel, and limit how we feel, how we react, what we're likely to do. It's not considered reputable science by most people because science is based on evidence. No one has yet discovered a gene for any specific kind of behavior. For the most part, genes just don't usually act that way. Most biological characteristics involve lots of different genes, as well as epigenetic or non-genetic factors such as, temperature, nutrition, or chemicals. And even something as simple as sneezing, which is clearly a biological reflex, involves lots of different genetic factors. The current method of evolutionary psychology is what some people call reverse engineering. And what that means is that they identify some behavioral pattern and then imagine what must have happened earlier in human evolution to bring it about or select for it. Of course, this is very creative thinking, but the main evidence they have is that we've evolved. That's what they got. They also have a tendency to get their, quote, behavior patterns from studies involving undergraduate student research volunteers and then project their findings as if they were human universals, not just globally in the present, but in prehistoric times. And of course, as we know, college students can be very interesting people, but there's a lot of cultural diversity out there beyond the campus. And it might seem a little odd that people who like to talk about human universals don't really pay much attention to what humans actually do at the global population level. I think one reason, is that they see cultural differences as sort of a superficial overlay on more basic biological reality. But they're also a little weak on the Pleistocene, which is when they claim those behavioral propensities originated. So, sure, you get the idea that things must have been pretty rough. But the thing is, the Pleistocene was not a stable situation. I mean, let's not forget, we're talking about a huge landmass from north of the Tropic of Cancer to south of the Tropic of Capricorn, and that's just Africa. And we're talking about several million years. So what happened during that time? Ice ages, hypothermal periods, changing sea levels. What kinds of environments did early humans have to cope with? Take your pick. Deserts, rainforests, savannas, seashores, lakesides. How many adjustments did they have to make just to survive? I mean, does this really sound like a good situation for fixed behavior patterns? If humans have any strong suit, it's adaptability. Sure. But the idea that these genes for behavior originated as much as a million years ago and stayed with us until now, even though conditions are different, implies that somehow we stopped evolving a long time ago. But that's just not true. I mean, a range of evidence shows that, if anything, the rate of human evolutionary change has probably increased in the past 10,000 years or so. So, it seems we're not really necessarily stuck with that old Pleistocene genome after all.
Is there a political motive behind this biological determinism or evolutionary psychology?
Well, as I said, obviously I can't read minds, but the idea that things can't change can be pretty appealing to people who don't want things to change. We've also seen a creeping back of the idea that biological differences in abilities or other characteristics, whether based on gender or population, has some validity. How can anyone nowadays deny that racism is still all around us, as you mentioned, kind of an American national social disease? And there's also undeniably an underlying view in some quarters that people with social and economic needs are to blame for their own problems. How many times have Republicans in Congress cut funding for food stamps or for Meals on Wheels to serve, elderly people who can't leave their homes, for extended unemployment benefits for people unable to find work, for the Head Start program? And how many Republican governors refuse to allow Medicaid benefits for people in their states, which are some of the poorest in the country? In some ways, it looks almost like a new eugenics movement, only now, instead of forced sterilization, people who need medical help are just left to die on their own.
We're speaking with Richard Perry, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at St. Lawrence University and author of a new book called Killer Apes, Naked Apes, and Just Plain Nasty People, The Misuse and Abuse of Science and Political Discourse. Your book is a takedown of pseudoscience that over a couple of centuries has sought to portray human behavior as a matter of biology, of genetics. But isn't it true that at one time the supporters of the discredited ideas of social Darwinism and eugenics were considered the progressives of their time?
Yeah, it's true. The social Darwinists did call themselves progressive, but in the 19th and early 20th centuries, progress actually meant survival of the fittest, not necessarily benign social programs to help the disadvantaged. Herbert Spencer is probably the main guru of social Darwinism, was opposed to public schools, public hospitals, public libraries, even public mail service, and basically anything that might keep nature from taking its course and eliminating the weak. So, it's funny how the meanings of words can change over time.
Now, as I understand it, you think that race is a cultural construct, not a biological one. what about gender and sexual preference? Because it seems a little paradoxical, does it not, that progressives think that no human behavior is biologically determined except their sexual identity?
Well, I doubt that anyone would say that no human behavior is biologically inherited. I mean, that would be a little extreme. The issue really is how much. We still don't understand, for example, why some people seem to have much more artistic ability or musical talent than others. I think we could say that progressives are sometimes more receptive to new evidence than some conservatives are, even when it might lead them to change their minds about some issue. For example, with convincing new evidence now that homosexuality is inborn rather than a matter of, quote, preference, most progressives, as far as I know, really had no problem with that. Ironically, lots of conservatives seem to want to insist that it's a matter of, quote, chosen lifestyle. It's kind of hard to imagine why, except that I suppose that if it's a matter of choice, then they can try to make a case to punish people for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned people changing their minds and adapting with their views. The President of the United States, one time thought differently about homosexuals and marriage between same-sex people. So, I guess progressives are a little more forward-thinking in that light. And clearly, scientific ideas do change over time, of course. Could you say that you're positive that there won't come a discovery that biology does play more of a role in human behavior than we perhaps think?
Well, of course, it's hard to be positive about that or about any other scientific premise of the day, but all we can do, I think, is to consider what we have at this point. And as the science of genetics has progressed so dramatically over the past couple of decades, including, mapping the human genome, all of this increased knowledge has made the idea of a gene for this or that complex behavior seem even more absurd.
We had a guest on the program last year, a political scientist, and he said some degree of how liberals and conservatives differ is, in fact, a function of how they are programmed to see the world. Paranoid in one case and hopeful in another. What do you think of that?
Well, I assume he was kidding a bit, but to tell you the truth, I'm not really comfortable with that. For one thing, it sounds to me a little too much like name-calling, which, very often indicates that you think you're losing the argument. And why programmed? Computers are programmed by programmers. Humans learn, not just from their parents, but from their whole social surroundings, from whatever happens to them over lots of years. And, certainly people turn out differently in the process, but, why that is, frankly, remains a mystery to me. Mm-hmm. But it does seem nice to be hopeful, but I'll agree with that part.
Right. Fair enough. Richard Perry, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at St. Lawrence University and author of the new book called Killer Apes, Naked Apes, and Just Plain Nasty People, The Misuse and Abuse of Science in Political Discourse. Professor Richard Perry, thank you so much again for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, progressive radio host, Stephanie Miller.
The one and only sexy liberal herself. I just haven't seen her in too long. But anyhow, and Brad, 3 hours. We put in 3 hours every day. Yeah. And the truth of it is, we are nothing but the warm-up act for Stephanie Miller.
There you go.
Hey, girlfriend, how are you?
Hello, handsome. Well, now I'm opening for myself this morning. I'll be on in 20 minutes.
All right,
there you go.
This is it. Well, hey, listen, congratulations. Good to talk to you. And Stephanie has a a very fun new book out called, Sexy Liberal.
Ah, there we go. Now I get
it to get your attention,
There
Bill.
you go.
I Sing of Me. That's right. So how's it going? What, Stephanie, you must be having as much fun as we are. I know you are. Listening to you.
If you see because we've talked about my family. My dad ran for vice president with Goldwater in '64. My 92-year-old Republican mom is still around. So
I have met in Asheville. We met in Asheville.
As I recall, she got a little handsy with you, Bill, and I apologize for that.
Bill didn't mind.
I just figured she took it from you. But anyhow,
right? Yeah, exactly. But I had to put right in the dedication. Sorry about all the swear words, Mom. So. Yeah, I'm thrilled, Bill. It just dropped July 4th, and it's the number one political book in the country. It's the number one humor book. It's the number one memoir on Amazon. So I couldn't be more thrilled. So yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. That is.
It is
really
filthy.
Great.
It is filthy like everything else I do. So that helps.
I know. Now you must be having as much fun as all of us with this Republican clown car, huh?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Seriously, how fast are my dad and Goldwater spinning at Donald Trump being one of the front runners of the Republican Party? I mean, it's just I don't even know what to say.
No, and every day it's more. He just throws out more outrageous comments, right?
Right. Didn't he? He made Charles Krauthammer called him a rodeo clown, and he just said, "Oh, a guy that can't buy pants, I'm gonna get from." And I'm like, what does that mean? Because he's in a wheelchair? Oh my God.
No.
What does it say about the Republican Party that he's like second in the polls?
Right. It says everything you need to know about the Republican Party. That's what's sad.
Yeah. Well, listen, you guys may laugh at him, but he's going to win the Latino vote.
That's what he says. Yes. He says he loves Mexicans and they love him.
Remember what Seth Meyers said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner a couple of years ago, that Donald Trump says he loves blacks. Well, unless the blacks are a family of whites, he's wrong.
Yeah.
But we'll fix all the world's problems if we just work longer hours, right?
Oh, I mean, it's like a gas machine over there. This clown bus comes with its own gas machine this time. It is just, so, Jim, we're talking about, like, being out of touch with the normal people. I thought I saw the latest study of how many hours Americans work. This is just like George Bush. Remember when he was, like, the woman that said, I have to work 2 jobs? He's like, oh, it's great. Uniquely American. What? No!
Yeah.
People shouldn't have to work 70 hours. But, so here comes another Bush saying the same thing. Like, Americans just need to work longer.
We don't have to raise, the logic is, we don't have to raise the minimum wage. We're still going to pay you dirt per hour. You just work more hours, and so you make more dirt. Right?
This is coming from a guy who his entire career is predicated on his last name. He's
exactly.
This guy who all the money he's ever made and all the success he's ever achieved was given to him by his last name, and he wants other people to work longer hours.
Yeah, Brad, exactly. It's like, does that work if you don't have a Bush family trust fund? Does that work too, or do you don't mean you? Right. Give me a break. And then don't even get me started. I'm sure you heard the other news. The George W. Bush, who unnecessarily sent all these troops into harm's way in Iraq, charged $100,000 to speak to a veterans group of wounded veterans from Iraq. I mean,
that's disgusting.
Well, what's disgusting is the.
Did he charge $100,000 when he went to Walter Reed Hospital to visit them?
Right. To make speaking of some of his finest humor, right?
Well, what's disgusting is the press won't pay any attention to it. I mean, we obviously know it through the press, but we know every speech that Hillary Clinton ever gave and how much money it cost and whatever type of conflicts of interest may have existed. But this will just be sloughed off.
Right. And by the way, did you see Laura Bush spoke to the same group and made $50,000?
Oh my God!
No, I didn't see
the year before.
People pay $50,000 to hear from Laura Bush.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the part about that. I guess this is a great country in that way.
Well, it's the old.
They don't need to work longer hours. It doesn't sound like.
No, it's a 70s.
Yeah, and people were smart enough to not want to buy Sarah Palin talking. So that's.
Oh, by the way, yeah.
So there is a God.
Yeah,
yeah. That sort of people didn't get as much attention.
So
Sarah just finally realized. her time has come and gone.
And I guess the vacuum is being filled by Donald Trump. Right? I mean,
yes. The douche canoe segment of the Republican Party now has a new spokesperson.
You know the voice. It's the one and only Stephanie Miller, our guest here. Her show now 21 minutes away. So she's
people are going to think they're late to work now, Bill. They're like, wait a minute.
right.
Stephanie's on?
This is how she's doing the show prep today, by joining us. And her new book, you can get it at all the regular places.
No, Amazon. Just on Amazon right now.
Amazon. Oh, okay. Amazon.
Yeah.
Amazon.com. Stephanie Miller of the Ice. No, it's, Sexy Liberal of the Icing. Of the Icing. All right. Check it out. And so, we're talking all about Donald Trump, but unfortunately, then we're not giving all the attention that's deserved by Bobby Jindal, right? Or Lindsey Graham.
Right.
I mean, the serious candidates out there, right?
Oh, God.
Lindsey.
It is.
Or Jim Gilmore.
Oh, Jim Gilmore.
Who just got in the race.
By the way, I think I speak for many of us when I say, who now? What? Who's this now?
Well, what I want to see is a Jim Gilmore, George Pataki debate for 17th place in the Republican field.
Yeah, don't you love that Pataki's the only one that spoke up about what Trump said about Mexicans, and everyone's like, oh, is he still in the race? Who's that guy? Who's that guy? Yeah. I mean, that's what, and Hillary pointed it out, but that was, to me, the most disgusting thing is nobody said anything on the Republican side until they, I guess saw how it played out in public, right? Or they didn't react until, all these businesses started cutting ties with him. That's a profile in political courage, right?
Yeah, well, the point that Hillary made the other day in her interview, I think so important, is take all the outlandish comments from Donald Trump, out of the equation if you can. They still all share the same position on immigration. They only for border enforcement. They don't want a path to citizenship.
Right.
So,
No, right when Rick Perry and a bunch of them said, "Oh, this doesn't reflect the Republican Party." Yeah, it does.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah, it does actually.
He wouldn't be second in the polls if it didn't.
I was just going to say exactly right. You look at how he's coming up in the polls. Now, listen. The other thing we got to say. Isn't it fun to see? I know you're correct the record, but I still say it's fun to see Bernie Sanders and all the crowds that he's getting.
Oh God! I'm sure you've had Bernie on. I have too.
Yeah.
I mean, what I love is that people are responding to Bernie's ideas. These candidates on the right are crackpots. Bernie's ideas are actually really popular mainstream ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the fact that he has said, I'm not going to attack Hillary. Mm-hmm. Hillary's obviously not going to attack him.
Right.
There's a real exchange of ideas here. She agrees with many, if not most, of his ideas. We got to say that. But it's
I can't wait for our debates. They're going to be like reasoned, thoughtful discussions about the issues. Theirs are going to be like someone's going to choke on their own tongue.
They may actually put our debates may actually put a lot of people to sleep because they will be substantive. I don't know. I don't know the first Donald Trump debate we'll actually call substantive, but we'll see.
It'll just be Trump and Chris Christie yelling at each other to shut up.
Shut up! Sit down.
This assumes, by the way, that's a good question. That presumes that Chris Christie will be on stage.
Oh, I know.
I don't know whether he's in the top 10.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to take a look at the list, and they're polling now. I gotta say this: I'm obviously not a fan of the RNC or Reince Priebus, but boy, what a mess they had in their hands. I don't know how they could have sorted this out. You can't have 17 people on the on stage, but 10 for 60 minutes. I mean, who's going to get anything substantive in?
And if Christie doesn't get in, there'll be further disruption. He'll be like at the window, like in The Graduate. Just, no!
He'll have a corn dog knocking on the window. Let me in!
Thunk, thunk, thunk. Hilarious.
Oh, man, I got to tell you. Right. Well, I guess are we stuck at 17? Can we round up a few more candidates?
Well, you would hope so.
Yeah,
I think there is going to isn't what's his name? Gilmore's going to be 17, and then I think isn't Scott Walker? I think, and then somebody else isn't
Scott
quite.
Walker
isn't
and Kasich.
Yeah, I don't know if they're in the count.
Right.
Oh,
they're
right.
Not in yet.
They're not
15,
in the count.
16,
Okay, there you
15,
go.
17, right? So I don't know. Well, yes, I this is not the party of your father, Stephanie Miller, right?
No.
Not the party. I mean, you have to say Barry Goldwater, as far right as he was, right? He was right on a lot of issues, right?
Oh, he'd be way too liberal. Are you kidding?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He'd be running to the left of Bernie in the Democratic primary.
Ronald Reagan
would
be too liberal for this crowd.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Think about
that. That's the irony of them invoking Reagan. Of course, you see it a little less as each election comes, but the invoking of Reagan, and he'd be a liberal in this crowd.
Wow.
Right? Don't you love how the adults in the room, all the sugar daddies like Foster Friess and the Koch brothers, they're all like trying to get the kids to behave. They're like, stop! No, the Reagan rule. Don't speak ill of each other. And meanwhile, they're just like ripping each other apart on Twitter every day. It's hilarious. We can just sit back, or
Yeah, that's true.
Donald Trump says, "Don't speak ill of other Republicans." That's what I do.
That's right.
That's what I do. Yeah. Well, Stephanie, congratulations again, babe. I'm just so proud of you, so happy for you. Again, it is Sexy Liberal on Amazon, Amazon.com, and the Stephanie Miller Show coming up in just 15.
There you go. I better get dressed.
All right. Love you.
Maybe I'll stay naked and sell more books.
The Naked Interview with Stephanie Miller. Brad Woodhouse here.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Ira Shapiro, Richard Perry, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.